A fake HOA cop tried to seize Army veteran Jake Delaney's service dog right off the trail, claiming it was an aggressive breed. Armed with a bogus badge and a smug sense of authority, he thought no one would question him. But Ranger's Pentagon embedded chip triggered a federal alert and recorded every threatening word. And just wait until you hear how this twisted powers play unraveled, and why justice hit harder than anyone expected. It was the kind of morning Jake Delaney used to look forward to. The sun had just climbed high enough to warm the dewy grass, and a soft breeze rustled through the oaks lining the trail loop behind his house in Lakemont Oaks. Jake liked walking early. Fewer people, fewer questions. He wore his old army ball cap low over his brow, spine stiffened by habit and hardware. Ranger, his service dog, trotted at his left side, ears alert but tail relaxed. Ranger wasn't just a companion, he was a lifeline. A 92-pound Belgian Malinois with steel gray fur at the tips of his ears and eyes that never missed a shift in Jake's breathing. Officially, Ranger was trained in mobility assistance and psychological interruption. Unofficially, he was the only thing that stood between Jake and the worst nights of his life. They'd made this loop dozens of times. Trailhead through the cul-de-sac, around the marsh clearing, then back behind the HOA clubhouse. Jake liked the quiet. But that morning something felt off even before they reached the path. Blocking the entrance was a black SUV, wide and squat like a patrol vehicle. But it wasn't police. On the driver's side door was a magnetic decal slapped crookedly across the paint. HOA Enforcement, Private Security. The font looked like it had been made in Microsoft Word. Jake slowed. So did Ranger. Then the driver's door creaked open, and a man stepped out. He looked like someone trying too hard to look official. Tactical vest with too many empty loops, pressed khakis, and knockoff aviator shades that caught the morning sun. His buzz cut was grown out just enough to look unkempt. No name tag, no body cam, no badge. "You can't bring that animal on HOA property," the man snapped, already walking toward them with short, stiff strides. "This trail is covered under covenant restrictions. Aggressive breeds are a liability. I'm going to need you to surrender the dog for evaluation. That's compliance protocol." Jake stopped cold, eyes narrowing under his cap. "Evaluation?" "I said hand him over," the man repeated. His tone had the bark of someone used to bluffing past hesitation. "HOA policy. I'm authorized to remove restricted animals on site." Ranger moved one step forward, planting himself squarely between Jake and the stranger. His breathing slowed. The low growl that rose from his chest was barely audible, measured, controlled, not threatening, just aware. Jake wasn't the kind of man to raise his voice without reason. He didn't move, didn't blink, just watched as the stranger pulled something from his vest pocket. A laminated card, the kind you'd find at a convention. A pixelated headshot, a clip art seal that looked like it had been printed off a home office computer. "You got a badge?" Jake asked flatly. "This is my ID," the man said, waving the plastic rectangle like it was a shield. "If you don't comply, I'll log it as a safety non-compliance incident. That can be a fine, or I call for backup and animal control handles it." Jake's jaw tensed. No one from the actual HOA had said anything about new dog restrictions. Ranger was a federally certified service animal. The law was clear. Still, the man took another step forward. He looked at Ranger, then down at the leash, and reached out as if to grab it. That's when Ranger let out a second growl, sharper this time, controlled but unmistakably protective. Jake didn't say a word. His hand flexed once at his side. Ranger's stance didn't shift. But in Jake's gut, something turned cold. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a neighbor trying to enforce a rule. This was a stranger, posing as an authority, trying to take something irreplaceable. And Jake knew from the quiet shift in Ranger's posture that his dog sensed it too. And still, the man kept reaching. The sound of raised voices echoed off the row of stucco homes. One by one, front doors creaked open, and neighbors stepped onto their porches, some in slippers, some mid-coffee, a few already filming on their phones. Jake didn't look at them. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to, but inside something had started to smolder. This wasn't just about a trail or a policy. This wasn't about a misunderstanding between a homeowner and some overeager board member. This was a stranger in a fake uniform trying to take Ranger. And not even because he believed in what he was saying. Jake could see it in the man's eyes. He didn't care. He wanted control, power. The leash was just the symbol. Jake's jaw locked. He didn't move, but he measured every breath, every twitch in the man's hand. And still, Ranger stayed perfectly still, ears angled forward, body low but braced. Ranger wasn't just a dog. He was registered under the Department of Defense Service Animal Program, enrolled through a Pentagon Veterans Rehabilitation Grant that covered specialized training for combat trauma response. He could sense changes in blood pressure. He could stop Jake from falling when his back seized. He could wake him from a dead sleep before the dreams got too real. More importantly, Ranger was chipped, not the kind of chip you'd find at a vet clinic. This one was integrated with biometric tracking, encrypted ID protocols, and live registration with a DoD database. It was a security precaution for veterans in high-risk environments. Jake had signed the paperwork in a windowless government building 4 years ago. He hadn't thought about it since. Until now. "If you don't surrender him," the man snapped, clicking his fingers toward his temple like he had a comm link, "I'll call backup. Or maybe I call animal control. Could bring a tranquilizer, if that's what it takes." Jake turned his head just slightly, not to provoke, but to center his voice. "You lay one hand on him," he said slowly, "and it's federal." The man scoffed. "Federal?" He let out a sharp, dismissive laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "You think a dog's going to stop me? Look at him. He's trained to obey. What are you going to do if I zip-tie that leash right now? You going to sick him on me?" Jake didn't blink. "Try." There was a beat of silence, heavy and electric. Then the man, puffed with false confidence, reached behind his back and pulled out a strip of black zip ties. Not police issue, hardware store standard. He crouched slightly and made a move for the leash, quick, like he'd done it before. Ranger didn't lunge, he didn't bark, but he shifted his weight forward, placing himself firmly between the man and Jake's leg, gaze fixed like a laser. A quiet warning hummed in his throat, more presence than sound. Then something caught the stranger's eye. The ID tag on Ranger's vest, one that had blended in with the other patches, was now blinking in the sun, a tiny red light pulsing near the bottom corner. The man leaned in, squinting, and read the black embossed letters, "Protected under DoD ID Protocol 47F. Unauthorized interference constitutes a federal offense." His bravado cracked. He hesitated just long enough for the wind to shift and reveal the full patch beneath it. "Service Animal, U.S. Department of Defense Deployment Certified." Jake didn't speak. He didn't have to. The man straightened up, suddenly aware of how many phones were still recording. One neighbor across the street called out, "You better back off, buddy. That's a federal dog." Another muttered, "Is this guy serious?" For a moment, the scene froze. Jake, standing tall, Ranger unwavering, and a fake cop caught between a threat he thought he could bluff and a reality he clearly didn't understand. The leash never left Jake's hand, but the fury inside him had shifted. No longer just anger. It was purpose. Cold, calm, and dangerous. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Jake didn't waste time. Less than an hour after the confrontation, he was seated at his kitchen table, phone in one hand, Ranger lying alert at his feet. The first call went to the HOA president, a woman named Cynthia Marks, who sounded genuinely stunned when he described what had happened. She insisted there were no authorized patrols scheduled that day, especially not ones involving uniformed personnel, and certainly no one with seizure authority over service animals. "We don't even have an HOA enforcement division," she said, voice cracking with alarm. "We contract a part-time landscaping inspection team. That's it. I don't know who that man was, Mr. Delaney, but it wasn't anyone from us." Jake kept his voice steady, but his grip on the phone tightened. He'd suspected as much. The next call was to the county sheriff's office. A deputy arrived 25 minutes later and met Jake out front. He listened carefully, reviewed the phone footage that Jake had recorded, audio, video, and time-stamped location metadata. As soon as the deputy saw the man's ID and heard the line about calling backup with a tranquilizer, his eyebrows shot up. "This guy," the deputy muttered, shaking his head. "We've gotten calls. Same type of SUV, same made-up badge. He's been harassing elderly folks, knocking on doors, claiming he needs to inspect yards for covenant violations. Told a woman last week she had to surrender her therapy cat or face fines." Jake didn't respond. He was already scrolling through his contacts. There was one name he hadn't dialed in years: Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Hanley, Pentagon liaison for veteran outreach programs. Jake had kept the number tucked away in his phone, a remnant from his medevac days when paperwork followed you home from war just as tightly as the trauma did. Back then, Hanley had walked him through everything, from the DoD medical release to the Advanced Service Animal Program that eventually gave him Ranger. Jake hit dial. Within 24 hours, 2 government vehicles arrived outside his home, one black Suburban with federal plates and another silver sedan with Homeland Security tags. A tall man in a dark suit and a woman in plain clothes stepped out. They identified themselves as a Pentagon liaison and a fraud investigator assigned to a joint task force tracking impersonation cases involving federal-affiliated programs. Jake brought them inside, poured coffee, and handed over everything: video, timestamps, eyewitness accounts from neighbors. But it was the detail about the blinking red tag on Ranger's vest that made both visitors lean in. "That tag," the investigator said slowly, "wasn't just for identification. It's active surveillance, embedded biometric and location monitoring. Think of it as a silent panic alarm." Jake nodded. "So when that guy grabbed the leash..." The Pentagon liaison finished for him. "It triggered an unauthorized contact alert in our system. You didn't know it, but you flagged it. Real time. That tag pinged our server the moment he touched it." Jake leaned back, stunned for a second. He'd always assumed the chip was just for cataloging, proof that Ranger was who he said he was. He never imagined it had built-in defense protocols. By the next day, the task force had cross-referenced neighborhood security cameras, phone pings, and Ranger's GPS log. They identified the impersonator's vehicle as a privately owned Ford Explorer with stolen plates from a decommissioned HOA maintenance truck. What sealed it was a time-stamped overlay between the fake ID in Jake's footage and a forged document seized in a previous HOA scam case under review. On the 3rd day, the marshals moved in. They found the man holed up in a rented storage facility just outside city limits. It wasn't just a stash. It was an operation. 4 imitation vests, each labeled HOA Compliance Officer, hung neatly on a rack. Nearby was a clipboard with typed notices and fake citations for everything from unauthorized bird feeders to excessive barking. A spreadsheet on the wall listed addresses with handwritten notes beside each. Vietnam vet, has old dog, skittish. Single woman, no cameras. Big dog, might be service, watch for tags. Jake's address was on that list, underlined twice. The story started as a headline on a local news site, a small piece tucked between a zoning board update and a community spotlight. Fake HOA cop arrested after attempting to seize disabled veteran's service dog. By that evening, it was on the 6 o'clock news. A day later, regional stations were broadcasting cell phone footage from the neighborhood, interviews with neighbors, and stills from the Pentagon-issued ID tag embedded in Ranger's vest. Veterans advocacy groups picked it up next. Within the week, it had gone national. Jake didn't ask for attention. He hadn't given the footage to the media, but the story had a gravity of its own, an impersonator exploiting a community under the pretense of authority, targeting the vulnerable, and crossing the line with someone who wasn't just prepared, but protected by layers of federal safeguards he never expected to need. Congressional aides reached out first. Then, a representative from the House Veterans Affairs Committee released a formal statement commending Jake's composure and calling for tighter protections against impersonators targeting military service animals. A Pentagon official confirmed the Department of Defense would be reviewing all DoD-linked chip protocols for similar alert scenarios. Jake didn't care about the politics, but when the commendation letter came in the mail, signed and embossed, he placed it quietly in the drawer next to Ranger's original certification. Meanwhile, the Lakemont Oaks HOA scrambled to control the narrative. They issued a statement claiming the impersonator had no affiliation whatsoever with their board, and that all residents are reminded not to interact with unauthorized individuals claiming enforcement authority. But it was too little, too late. Their failure to notify residents about prior complaints had become public record, and Jake's civil suit, filed that same week, named them in full for negligence, emotional distress, and failure to protect community safety. But the most damning evidence didn't come from footage or press coverage. It came from Ranger. When the Pentagon Cyber Division retrieved the signal from his DoD chip, they found more than just GPS logs. The biometric unit had recorded ambient audio during the incident, high quality, encrypted, and fully admissible. Every threat, every lie, every word that man had said as he tried to claim authority he didn't have was preserved and cataloged. In court, the prosecution played the recording over the speakers. The room was silent as the fake enforcer barked orders, mocked Jake's disability, and outlined his so-called compliance procedure. It didn't sound like law. It sounded like a man on a power trip with no brakes and no badge. The judge, a former military legal officer, didn't ask for clarification. He didn't blink. The sentence came quickly. 11 years. Charges: fraud, impersonation of a federal officer, attempted theft of a military-registered asset, tampering with protected federal equipment. Jake sat still in the courtroom. He didn't smile when the verdict came down. He wasn't looking for revenge, just resolution. Ranger lay quietly at his feet, ears flicking only once as the gavel fell. As they stepped into the sunlight outside the courthouse, reporters tried to crowd in. Microphones, questions, cameras. Jake ignored them. He simply reached down, rested a calloused hand on Ranger's broad head, and gave him one soft pat. "I told you," he said under his breath, voice low and steady. "We've still got a few more missions left." And with that, they walked on, side by side, not just a veteran and his dog, but a team that had faced down more than war, more than fear. They'd faced injustice, and won.